So, welcome back. Today's guest is an athletics coach, science teacher, 12-time Ironman finisher, one-time double Ironman finisher, and a 7-time 100-mile endurance run finisher. He is the author of Tripolar, which is the story of a bipolar triathlete, ultra runner, triathlete, advocate for mental health, 12-step programs, and how physical training promotes mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, all the way from the LA area. I would love to welcome Tim Davis. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
My absolute pleasure. When I saw all of the things that you are centering your life around, it spoke to me, right? Because I'm a therapist, and bringing in health, wellness, physical movement, goal setting, self-care, all of those things are so important to living a healthy life. So I'm really glad that you're here and that you're going to share your story and a lot of tips for people, whether it's something that they're going through any of these things or not. There's going to be so many common themes that we all go through that I think that you're going to be an incredible person to share some tips on how to succeed in life.
Yeah, I hope so. I've learned a lot over the years. It took a while to get here, but yeah, there's just a few basic things I do for self-care. I mean, I try to keep it simple, but they're very important and they make me a happier person and my whole household a happier household. So
Yeah, for sure. So let's start off with that, right? Because we can get into the story, but I think right as we're now as this interview is taking place, it's the middle of February 2021, and self-care has to be at the forefront of everything we're doing with this pandemic. We just got out of, this crazy politics going on, and we have to prioritize the things that we have to prioritize versus letting all the chaos consume us. So what are some of the things that you kind of maybe have decided are your daily vitamins, the things that are must-haves for you in order for you to be the healthiest human being you can possibly be?
all right. Well, that's really easy. First thing for me is, I got sober through 12-step programs. So most days, I have my home group is a 6:15 a.m. meeting. It's called the sunrise meeting. And a lot of days, except for when I sleep in, but most days I start with that meeting and it gets me centered. It's an hour long. So going to a 12-step meeting and praying and meditating is huge. And then exercising, I'm kind of an exercise addict. I kind of became that in sobriety. And I love the way the endorphins make me feel. So it's a priority for me to either swim, bike, or run, or do some weight training or yoga or, other cross training for at least a half hour to an hour each day. A lot of days, a little more than that because I'm a little obsessive about that. But those are key. And just eating right, being healthy, and being of service to others, I make sure my daughter has breakfast before she starts her distance learning school, see if my wife needs coffee or anything, just help them out and, fix everything around the house because apparently I'm the only one who's handy with tools. So, that's the dad job, traditional role. I mean, my wife helps sometimes. I shouldn't knock her. She's actually pretty handy. So, we do a lot of projects together. So that's cool. So.
Yeah. So eating, healthy, moving your body, hydration, contemplation, which could be for people, prayer, could be meditation, doing of service, right? It's funny because a lot of these are ingrained in all of the psychological disciplines. They're ingrained in all the spiritual disciplines. They're also ingrained in the 12-step discipline, right? As far as, right, be of service and, right, that's the whole, sponsor, sponsee paradigm that's in the 12-step world, right? And finding ways that you can, I guess, leverage your talents to make the world a better place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most of this I've learned through therapy and 12 steps, when I was getting sober. And it, like you said, being of service, helping others. I mean, when I first heard about that when I was getting sober, it sounded a little odd, but it just really does feel good to help others, in AA, we say, you can't keep it unless you give it away, for fun and for free, so that's like, if you want to keep your sobriety, you got to, sponsor other guys, which I do, because my sponsors didn't get paid to sponsor me. They still don't, and I don't, it's just a free thing. We just, if you give, you take, you give back. It's great.
So let's go back to the time where life was a little bit more chaotic for you, because now we're on the opposite side of the mountain. So let's go to the right where this all started. And, you talked about going through 12 steps in recovery and all these other things. What was going on then that started getting you to the outcomes, the positive outcomes that you have now that were in a place of chaos and stuff like that for you back then?
Yeah, what was going on then was, I was 25 and my wife was pregnant with our first child. And I was smoking so much weed and drinking so much alcohol at that time that she was worried I wouldn't be sober enough to drive her to the hospital, when the baby was ready to pop out. And I went to one meeting and felt like, this wasn't for me. I could quit on my own, like many alcoholics and addicts do when they're, first thinking maybe it might be a problem, but most of us think we can quit whenever we want. And anyway, I got sober long enough to get her to the hospital, but then I, went on a binge right after that and disappeared for a few days. And that's not a good thing to do when you got a newborn at home and you're supposed to be a responsible parent. So, having kids really made me realize that I really need to get my stuff together. But it took a while because I didn't realize that, I really had to want it for myself. I wasn't fully surrendered. It took a handful of years of kind of going in and out of the program, but I did commit to, my first rehab, a few months after he was born. And, that began a 5-year series of kind of going in and out, getting some time, like maybe 30, 60, 90 days, even a couple times, 6 months, but then thinking, I could have just one drink, but it never was just one drink. And at the same time, I started therapy when I first started going to rehab. And I had, at age 25, I had like kind of at least 12 to 15 years of unprocessed stuff that I really needed to work through. Because when I was first getting sober, I wanted to blame everybody but myself for my drinking and using. I wanted to blame bad things that happened to me in my childhood, my older brother who kind of got me started on all, smoking weed and booze, he was 4 years older than me. And when he was 12, he started doing it. So when I was 8, I started doing it because he just let me do what he did, and so and then there was the trauma of my dad dying at age 13 and my older brother blaming me for his death, in this tragic accident in our house. And in therapy and rehab, they kind of asked you this question: can you pinpoint the point or determine at which point in your life did you start using drugs and alcohol to escape pain and negative feelings? And that was really easy for me because it was after my dad died and being blamed for his death that I started to drink and use to escape painful and negative feelings. And then that just became my coping mechanism for the next 15 years until I finally got sober.
Well, that's a key component that a lot of people don't talk about in general when you're trying to heal and move forward in life, to identify some of the traumas and what stage of life, what developmental stage of life those traumas happened. And I know that based on my work as a therapist and all the trainings I've taken, is that if you don't navigate and heal the trauma, it's going to make sobriety much more difficult, because anything that triggers somebody, even if it's not the direct same story as what they went through, but if you have an emotional experience, right? In other words, you get frustrated or angry or sad or disappointed or resentment, anything that's going to trigger that same emotion, even though the experience is different, will still bring up those old unfinished things, right? And that will continue to cause someone to want to, self-medicate in whatever way they do it, healthy or unhealthy, in order to feel better about what that emotion is. So again, it really doesn't matter for me what the trauma is about, because it's the emotions linked to the trauma. It's the belief about what that trauma is like, that experience is like for you. I'm not saying that the experience is not important. I'm saying is that I want to get to the underlying thing is, like, what is going on for you in relationship to that trauma, and then work from there to help resolve through it. So what were some of the ahas that you had, if you want to share, that you realized about yourself that allowed you to move forward, to allow you to have some healing in this process?
Yeah, well, I one of the biggest ahas is I had to realize that I had to stop blaming everybody else for me being an alcoholic and addict and for my problems, because, early on in my marriage, I wanted to blame my wife for being too controlling or a nag or whatever, all these negative things. I would purposely start fights with her just so I could have an excuse to, take off and go drink or get high. And I did that a lot. It was so bad. We started going to couples therapy, a year before our son was born. And, sometimes I would smoke weed before going into the sessions. And pretty much, she would kind of basically bitch about, all the things I was doing, like getting high every day. And then, when it was my turn to talk, I would kind of, say a few things, but then our couples therapist would always suggest that I go to 12-step meetings. And I wasn't ready for that yet.
How dare they? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my first bout with therapy. But then once I got sober, I got this great therapist who was 15 years sober. And we had this pact that I had to keep seeing him until I got 5 years sober, or 1 year sober. It took 5 years to get the 1 year sober.
Right.
It really helped me work through a lot of the stuff, and process all that, the trauma and the abuse, because I was also severely physically abused by my older brother and a little bit by my dad, and when my dad died, I lost my protector, because my dad would, if he caught my older brother whooping on me, he would whoop on my older brother. But once my dad wasn't around, I didn't have my protector to stop him. And he raged a lot more than my dad did. So takeaways were, I got to work on myself. I can't blame others. It's an inside job. And, figure out, what were the things that triggered me, learning what my triggers were, and learning other coping mechanisms besides self-medicating with drugs and alcohol to, deal with those things, like saying the serenity prayer, journaling. I started journaling a lot. You do that a lot with, step writing process, especially fourth and fifth step, but even continuing with the daily 10th step inventory. And, when you do your inventory, you kind of write down, what you're resentful about, what your fear is, or what you feel harmed you. And then you kind of try to identify who or what caused that. And then you try to identify the feeling behind that. Is it affecting your ego or your self-pride, or, there's a handful, I can't think of all the other ones, but what about you is that emotion or feeling, connecting it to that, and then you can work past it. And then the fourth column, which they don't mention in the big book, but most sponsors will tell you to do, is what is your part in that situation? Again, trying to point the finger.
Well, the accountability side of things, right? Which is so tough for people to get through. And I had a conversation with someone today about this, and at the end of the conversation, at the end of the session, I'm like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did I frustrate you and piss you off today? Me, the therapist.
Yeah.
Right. Because I knew that they were not having it. I knew they were not happy with me. And I wanted to call that out and put it on the table, but I also wanted them to take accountability for their emotional experience, that it's not me, it's anybody who button pushes them.
Yeah.
But yet they were coming to me as a button, right? If they were going to come and attempt to solve the problem with me the same way they always solve the problem, we're not getting anywhere. And my job is to do something different. And then therefore I said, my job is to push buttons, to see what comes up, to see how you respond, to see how you react, to see how you engage with that, and also to see, what do you do then? And I said, is there a part of you that doesn't want to come see me again next week? And the person said, absolutely. Great. Where else is that showing up in your life when someone pushes you and agitates you? Oh, well, I run. Oh, how many therapists have you been to in the last X amount of years? Oh, I've been to this many. I'm like, that's a lot of therapists. How many of them agitated you? All of them. Uh-huh. And what's going on with what you're trying to solve with the people you're trying to solve? Oh, no, so how are you going to be different with me so we can then take it and be different with other people, right? So it's all about the pattern. And I love what you're saying, right? That accountability piece.
Yeah.
Is so huge. And the other side of the coin is that you have to be fully responsible for your feelings and emotions, and also know that you are not responsible for what someone else feels.
Yes.
Don't be a dick to them, right? But you're not responsible to solve anybody else's issues, or responsible for when you are being the version of you that's the healthiest. If someone else doesn't like it, you're not responsible for that. And you shouldn't one down your needs because they may not like that you're actually trying to be healthy.
Yeah, we're powerless over people, places, and things, and we have to learn to set healthy boundaries for ourselves. Everything you're saying is like, my sponsor, forces me to do that, to look in the mirror. And, when I first was going through this process, there were times when I hated him and I didn't want to go meet with him to do step work. And, I wanted to blame him for my problem. I mean, when I first got sober, I basically fired my sponsor. Every time I relapsed, I blamed my sponsor for the relapse. I went through several sponsors, and it was me, the common denominator was me. And once I finally surrendered and, got tired of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, but getting the same result, which was, drinking and using and ruining, causing all kinds of problems in my relationships around me. Once I did that, then I was willing to take contrary action, which they teach you in the 12-step program. You got to do, if you want things to be different, you got to do different things. You get different results. And so I started doing all that. And
well, you also
things got better.
Different, right? And you also, it's not even just coming up with different solutions. It's your thinking and foundational starting point of where you try to solve a solution that has to be radically different, right? And so there's what we call first and second order change in the therapy world, right? And the first order change is like the New Year's resolution. I'm just going to go to the gym, right? But that doesn't change the belief system and the structure around that. That's a second order change, right? And that's why most people's commitment to something fails after 5, 10, 15 days. And why, all these new gym equipment is now on sale right now at the beginning of February on OfferUp for, because they spent the $1,300 on that Bowflex and now they're selling it for $500 because it's like, it's sat there for the last 6 weeks, right? So that's first order thinking, where it's kind of like, I need to do something different. And then they try to solve the problem with the same thinking and same logic that got them stuck in the problem in the first place. And
Yeah.
that's a huge thing that I want people to hear from this conversation right now, right? You can't solve the problem from the same way that got you stuck in the problem in the first place. And I think Einstein, I think that's an Einstein quote, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something along that Einstein said, right? You can't solve the problem with the same logic that got you there in the first place. And the same thing, right? You have to think from a very different foundational way and a very different way of understanding and appreciating and embracing, which really does come with accountability and empowerment, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So transition us into the athletic side of things as part of your sobriety. Did you grow up being a runner or a cyclist or anything? Or is this something that came new to you as you were going through this transition and journey of sobriety?
In high school, I played a lot of sports. I played football, basketball, and I ran track every year because our football coach said, if you want, spring conditioning, you guys got to run track. And when I started running track my freshman year, I tried a bunch of different events. And at the sprinting, I wasn't the fastest guy. I was maybe medium. I couldn't get in the top 6 places and win the ribbons and medals. But in the mile and the 2 mile, I had good stamina and good endurance, and I could usually finish in the top 6 and get those awards and ribbons. So I kind of stuck to that because I think I don't know about the title is says Your Winning Life. I liked winning. So I stuck with that because I was just more naturally suited for that. And then in college, I started running the marathon every year. I was going to USC, and my freshman year, a week before the LA Marathon, I went out to dinner with my roommate and his parents. And they were talking about how his grandpa runs the LA Marathon every year. And me, 18 years old, young, dumb, and, thinks
Right.
I'm whatever, all that. I decided, well, if an old man can do it, so can I. And I went out and I ran it, and the first 13 miles went great. The second 13 miles were really rough because I cramped up everywhere, and I struggled through it. I did finish under 4 hours, just barely, but it was a mission. Then I was like, well, that was rough. And once I kind of healed up after a week or so of everything, all the lactic acid working itself out, I was like, if I train, I could probably do it faster, and I went back next year and did it in 3.5 hours, and just
Wow.
and I did it again my junior year, but then my senior year, kind of my drinking and drugging was getting so bad, I got lazy and didn't train for it. It's funny, in AA, they say, there's this whole thing we read about, like how if you're an alcoholic or not. And they list this whole series of things we do, and one of them is taking up bouts of rigorous physical exercise. And, looking back, I can see, when I was in college, training for the marathon was something that would kind of help me cut back on drinking and smoking weed so much because I had to focus on my training. But then after I ran the marathon, it was like,
right. Everything came back.
Yeah, I'm drinking and getting high.
Right. So your life was segmented. And right, I want people to hear this, right? If you're segmenting out parts of your life where there's times where you say, I know I can block out some unhealthy habits to focus on a specific goal versus this becoming the healthy lifestyle overall, right? What you're saying is like, that's part of this unhealthy pattern. This is part of this unhealthy thinking. And I want people to really hear that, where if there's a lot of stops and starts in your life, but you're like, well, I can do this for 6 weeks, but it's not becoming something that's ingrained in you. What should they start thinking about that? Where do they need to go to start looking at that type of stuff to really make it more consistent for themselves?
Well, I think first and foremost, the thing I've learned through therapy and 12-step programs is the 3 A's: awareness, acceptance, and action. In order to change a habit or, kind of solve a problem, you got to first be aware, and then you got to accept it, and then you got to make an action plan and take action for it. And they say it takes 30 days to make a new habit. So you got to at least commit to 30 days. And, if that becomes a thing, great. I know when I was a year and a half sober, I weighed 250 pounds and I was depressed because I'm only 5'8" and I was, at least 60 pounds overweight. And I made a New Year's resolution to stop eating seconds, start going to the gym or exercising for at least a half hour to an hour every day. And I had this rule that I wasn't allowed to watch TV or play video games until I did my exercise first. And I started doing that, and I kept this little notebook and I wrote down what I did for exercise every day, which I still do 12 years later. I just, run 5 miles, play basketball for an hour, whatever it was. And I still do that. And, and it's just like, it's become this habit. It's just like, it's automatic. I don't even think about it. I'm like, after my workout, I just jot it down, now I put it in a spreadsheet on my phone, but
yeah, I love it. Like Jesse Itzler, who is into ultra everything, right? He has his daily vitamins, which, right, these are the things you need to do every day for your day to be right amongst everything else. And I know, I'm not sure if it was either Andy Frisella or Ed Milet that talks about this other power list, right? These are the 5 or so things you have to give in order for your day to also be fully accomplished. I need to do these things no matter what's going on in my world. These things have to get done as a priority in order for me to know that I'm accomplishing what I want to accomplish. And I'm sure there's other versions of that out there also. So I want to challenge people, right? And just as in the middle of our conversation, I want to challenge everybody who's listening to create some version of 2, 3, 4, 5 things that you need to do every single day that you know will be uplifting, that will be healthy, that will be spiritual, that will be motivational, that will be helping you move towards a better version of you. And put that down on some type of list. And if you want, I will give you a worksheet that I use with my clients. So you all just have to hit me up on Instagram, or you can email me and I will give you that worksheet for you to do it. If you're stuck, I'm happy to even brainstorm with you if you message me on IG. But right, I really do believe that that's a commitment to do things every day, right? I just did mine. I started mine this week. Again, I started it over. And because I admittedly have been lazy about it with all the chaos this last, few months. And it's going to be 80 ounces of water minimum. It's going to be 10 minutes of meditation a day, which I've been doing consistently for the last many months. But now it's on the list, right? It's not just I'm doing it, but it's now on a list that I have to check off. There has to be some type of movement every day. That's not just me seeing clients. And there's 1 or 2 other things on there, but that has to be, right? It's going to be my daily vitamins that I need for the next 30 days towards a goal, right? So, and that's also not including my short-term, long-term goals as well. But I'm very happy. Anybody who's listening and they want to walk through this with me, I'm happy to take 5 minutes to walk someone through it. But I do believe that's such a powerful part of personal growth and development. So as you started going and getting back into this, like, where did you start as you're now going through this a bunch of years later, where you picked it back up again?
The exercise. It started at January 1st, 2009, when I weighed 250 pounds. I went that day and I just went to go run a mile just to see. I was also smoking a pack of cigarettes a day at the time. It's like, how long does it take me to run a mile? Because in high school I could run in under 5 minutes, and I went and ran a mile. Well, I ran and walked because I couldn't even run a mile straight, and it took me 12 minutes. And at first I was, wow, this really sucks. I was a little depressed, but then I was angry. I'm like, you know what, you're going to get back down to at least 6-minute miles again. And 6 months later, I was back down to 6-minute miles. I just started out, running a mile every day or every other day. And then after a few weeks, running 2 miles, building up, and then, just mixing it up and then doing some cross training. And, about 6 months later, I'd lost 60 pounds. And then I was doing a half marathon again. I did a half marathon in 2 hours and 5 minutes, which was slow for me because, when I was younger and right after college, I was running in like an hour and a half. But, I was building up from there. 3 months later, I did my first triathlon and just loved it. It was a sprint triathlon, and I finished 16th in my age group, which I thought was amazing. It's really not that good. But
did you do a lot of training for the other 2 sports? Or are you just like, I can run, so therefore I can bike and I can swim? Or are you actually cater a curriculum for yourself?
Right at that 6 months, right after I ran that half marathon, I kind of got this weird injury with my hip. And after seeing a few specialists, they said, basically, you lost so much weight so fast that you've got kind of this hip protrusion because your body's kind of not recalibrated yet to the new you with all this weight loss. And I wasn't able to run for a couple months, but during those 2 months, I was able to cross train because I still wanted to lose some more weight and just get leaner. And so I just started swimming and biking. And my wife was a swimmer in high school and college, and she gave me little tips on how to breathe to the side and stroke properly. And I really started loving swimming. And that's when I really, got into doing laps of the pool. And I kind of had always cycled on and off. Like when I was in high school, I had a mountain bike and I used to ride my bike to school and used to do a lot of mountain biking. But now I got a road bike. Yeah. It was funny when I showed up at that triathlon, I was in basketball shorts with a mountain bike and a cracked helmet. And there's all these other guys out there with these like slick suits and these aero helmets and these carbon fiber bikes and everything. And I didn't even have goggles for the swim. So I was like, if I get all the gear and really train, I could do better. And I started doing more and more and got better and better and faster and faster. Yeah. Eventually started getting some top 3 places in some of the smaller ones. I wasn't like a super, professional elite, but in some of the smaller ones, I could place in the top 10. It felt good.
So funny. It reminds me of this story. Like a bunch of years ago, I used to go out to Boulder, Colorado. I have a bunch of friends there. And I remember seeing like 20-year-old Subarus with like road bikes on top. And then I'm like, all right, well, this is what's going on? Like in Boulder is obviously a huge cycling community. And they have like, I can't remember which, like Team Garmin was like from there and whatever, right? And they have so much science and research coming out of Boulder for cycling and running. And I got the bug. I got the bike bug after that, right? But it was so funny. I remember seeing like old Subarus, 20-year-old Subarus that were maybe like $1,500, $2,000 if they traded them in with like $15,000 road
Yeah.
bikes on the roof. And I'm like, so this is right. And now I'm in Miami, and I'm like, oh, well, everybody has really expensive cars, but they're not like taking care of them. It's right. And they have like these like $150 Huffy bikes from like Walmart. Right. And I mean, people are into cycling here, are really into cycling here. Cause it's,
Yeah.
you see those things also, right? The carbon fiber tri bikes and whatever. And what's a new thing I'm going to add on, but it's an expensive hobby, cycling
Oh yeah.
over swimming and running. Those are very entry level, right? You can get get a
Uh-huh.
good pair of sneakers and, you're good and learn how to hydrate and do nutrition. But cycling is a whole, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
rabbit hole of
Yeah.
money.
Full disclosure, on a teacher's salary, I bought a Cervelo P3 tri bike in 2010, and it's still the bike I use today. The same bike 11 years. And I got some triathlete friends that'll buy a new bike every other year.
Right.
And I'm just like, well, they make a lot more money than me. They can afford that. I got 3 kids, 2 in college, and that bike still runs pretty good to me. I know, an upgrade would be nice. It'd probably run a little faster, but I'm more into trail running these days anyway. I mean, I whip out my bike occasionally on some cross training days. I still do a couple tries a year or so, but mostly I do trail running now. I'm really into the mountains.
That's amazing. Do you have any good resources, any books, any YouTube videos, any people that, or, even some equipment stuff that you would recommend to people just getting started? And this, I know like Hokas are like for running and trail running right there now. I mean, the regular Hokas are pretty good for trails too, because they're so cushioned and so protected, but I know they're now making some good trail running shoes. But is there some stuff that you like absolutely love and like you swear by, that like, if you're going to be doing some running, this is what you need to get? If you're going to be doing some cycling, this is where you need. So what are some of those things that you're thinking just off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, well, for swimming, I love my Swim P3 player made by Speedo. It's great because, sometimes I'll do, when I'm really training for a long race, I'll do like a 2-hour session in the pool. So having, the Aquabeat solicited music while you're swimming that long is great. For biking, I recommend Cervelo because I have a Cervelo, but there's a lot of good things out there. The Aero helmet can be optional. I like the Gyro helmet because it's got the visor that just kind of magnetically comes on and off, so you don't have to wear sunglasses. And it's just, when you wear sunglasses and you ride, you crane your neck up more and you can see the rim of the sunglasses, and it kind of just hurts your neck and it's kind of annoying with your vision. The full visor is better. And for running, Hokas, definitely Hokas. Because I've had 2 knee surgeries in my 20s, both my ACLs I had to get reconstructed due to basketball injuries, and so they took out a lot of the meniscus too. So I basically have almost no cushion left in my knees. So the Hokas really help, provide that extra support, give me some extra cushion to make up for the lack of cushion that's now in my knees at age 46.
Yeah.
And I just 2 years ago I had stem cells injected in my left knee, which has really helped out a lot. And then Dry Max socks. If you're going to be doing any kind of long distance running or anything where you sweat a lot, and I started using them 5 years ago. Before that, I would get blisters all the time in marathons, ultra marathons. Since I started using Dry Max socks 5 years ago, I haven't gotten a blister since. They're just amazing. So highly recommend that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book, right? It's called
All right.
Tripolar, the story of a bipolar triathlete, which is the one Elmer read. Obviously, this is really cool, the idea of writing this book. And I love the title, but right, we didn't get into the bipolar side of things and how the book came evolved out of all of this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. People have been telling me for years, because people who know my kind of crazy story, so like, and now where I'm at today, they're like, you should write a book, and it wasn't until I got injured, maybe I guess a year and a half ago, and I had to really cut back on my running for a while, that I actually sat down on the computer and started working on it. It's a memoir, an inspirational mental health memoir, and it, chronicles my journey from childhood trauma into, multiple addictions, into finally finding recovery and finally getting sober at age 33. And then, like we discussed before, I had a year and a half sober, being really overweight, and then getting into triathlons. And, the last several chapters talk about all the Ironman races I've done and the ultra marathons I've done. So it's kind of got 3 parts, which makes it tripolar. And even on the cover, it's got a picture like at the top of a guy with, sitting down with his hands in his head, looking miserable with all these drugs hanging over his head. And then the middle picture is kind of, starting to get sober. And the last picture is like a Zen smiley guy, like, I've got recovery now. And at the bottom, it's like a swim, bike, run dude, so it's just
nice.
There's a lot of things that come in 3, in AA, they told me, alcoholism is a physical allergy to alcohol, coupled with an obsession of the mind, coupled with the spiritual malady. So, I just learned, through therapy, 12 steps and exercise, I got a disease of a 3-fold nature. So I got to take care of the mind, body, and spirit to stay healthy, happy, and in recovery, and stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
I got in a lot of trouble when I was drinking and using drugs, and it's been nice not getting into trouble anymore. I really enjoy, not getting in
Now it
trouble.
sounds like you're
It's
getting
great.
into the healthy trouble, right? By taking care of yourself. And it's funny, like we look at like getting in trouble, like immediately assume it's a negative thing versus like, what is the good, healthy trouble? Right. We can reclaim that word and redefine it. Like, oh yeah, like I got in trouble on my running course today. You're like, well, what was your trouble you got into? Oh, I didn't run the mile as fast as I wanted to. Right. You can reclaim the languaging of what we're talking about while, working on the things that we want to work on. But I do love the idea of using health and wellness as part of the therapeutic tools, in addition to talk therapy, in addition to in the circumstances where medication management is important, right? For some people it is. I'm a huge fan of functional and integrative medicine and finding out what's going on in the biochemistry and using nutritional supplements and food and all those things as well. But I also know that like healing the trauma is
Hmm.
got to be the most single-handed important part of this. And the modality I use typically for that is something called neuro-emotional technique, which actually started out in Carlsbad with Dr. Scott Walker, who's a chiropractor who found that emotional and physical symptoms come from traumas that our mind body is storing. And then it's showing up when, like I said, where we re-experience that experience in some way, shape, or form. And this modality has been insane. I had panic attacks about 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Nothing was working to get rid of it. And 2 or 3 sessions of this NET protocol, like just it went away. And
Hmm.
a little bit after that, I started taking trainings in that. So I do love, the idea that you were able to combine all of that together to create this really amazing, proactive, healthy lifestyle. And that's again what I want to focus people on hearing is that in order for things to change, you have to be proactive and you have to be consistent. You have to have accountability and it has to be trackable. Like you're doing when you're
Yeah.
writing it down, you're putting it right, and you have a sponsor. There's the accountability. You have your wife. There's accountability of it, right? But it really does all those components, I do believe, have to come together. And then the other part, which I love, which is telling your story and not being ashamed of where you were to where you are to where you're going.
Yeah, yeah. In AA, they say we do not wish to regret the past, nor do we wish to shut the door on it. So when I was first getting sober, I had so much guilt, shame, and remorse. But, going through the steps in therapy, I've learned that it's okay to talk about it. And like going back to the bipolar, I was diagnosed bipolar at age 27. And, this was 2 years of being in and out of rehabs and just, having a hard time admitting I was an alcoholic and an addict. And then when I was diagnosed with bipolar, I'm like, oh, I got to deal with this now too. I was so angry and I was in denial about that for a couple more years. And, I'd take my meds and start feeling better and then think, oh, I'm cured. I don't need to take my meds anymore. And I did that several times. And every time I went off my meds, I'd relapse and start self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. So I finally learned I got to stay on my meds, stay sober. And, and then the exercise came along too, because, I'm a type 2 rapid cycler bipolar. And even with the meds and going to my meetings, sometimes I still just have this manic energy or anxiety that still kicks up. And going to exercise, blowing off some steam would be like the thing that third piece that would, make the anxiety go away or chill out my mania. So that's what I glommed onto finally, like that third and final piece that really helped me achieve serenity. And for the most part, I mean, we all have moments that were not serene, especially when you drive on the freeways in LA. Although during the pandemic, it's been nice.
Right. It's one of the few places that I know is complete utter chaos. And until you get off the thing, I remember once I was visiting a friend, a childhood friend of mine, had an office down in Santa Monica, and I remember visiting him and driving back to where I was staying in the Pico Robertson area. And that's like, I don't know, it's not a far drive, distance wise. But on a Friday afternoon traffic, it took me almost an hour, and I think it was like 8 to 10 miles max. Is right, really maybe 8 miles max. I can't even think it's that long. But it was just like, wow, like this is worse than Miami. But I also know all the beautiful, wonderful things about being in the LA area when there's not an earthquake. But which happened to be the last time I was there. That there was 2 earthquakes it was July 4th weekend.
That was like 2 years ago. Yeah,
2 years
crazy.
ago. Yeah. That I got woken up by so it was kind of scary, but that's really
scary.
cool. So I want to let people get in touch with you. So I know your website is ultratimdavis.com, and also on Instagram it's tripolar_Tim, and also the name of your book is Tripolar: The Story of a Bipolar Triathlete. So Tim, one last question before we wrap up is kind of that if you had 2 minutes to meet with someone and you knew you were never going to get to hang out with them again, what would be the wisdom that you would want them to know in that time frame?
Well, depending on what their problems are, I would probably tell them, remember to keep first things first. If you're setting out to-do lists each day, try to keep it to 3 to 5 things. Don't make this list that are 20 things long, because you're never going to finish your whole to-do list in one day. Keep it simple. Easy does it. Basically all these cliches I've learned in the 12-step program.
Right.
Remember to breathe. Those would be the things I would tell them,
Yeah, I love it. My new thing is like, okay, how do we solve your problem simply and playfully? What do you mean? I'm like, well, if you had two options, we can go about it and it could be very intense and very like, whatever, or we can solve it by being playful and lighthearted. Which one would you prefer? Like, oh, I'd like to, like, you can solve a problem by joking your way through it. I'm like, yeah, if you choose to, right?
Yeah.
But you have all the choices you want. So I love the idea of what is the simplest, easiest way to solve this. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be convoluted, and we don't have to have 45 different steps. Can we solve it in 3 steps? Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's cut through all the other BS, right? But that allows you to think differently. So I really do like that, right? Keep it simple, which I know is the KISS and all those.
Yeah.
It's funny. I always love there's so many phrases in the 12-step world that are so applicable. People are like, oh, it's so cliche, right? Like, but they're so profound because they're simple to remember.
And they work.
Right. And it works if you keep working it, right?
Yeah.
So
I know when I first came in, I kind of didn't like them, but man, they're so good. I don't know how anybody could not like them. I mean, the other thing I learned through therapy at 12 steps is that happiness is a choice. Like you were just saying, you're talking about choices. You can choose to be happy, or you can choose to be sad. Are you going to let things bother you that much? And then that's the other thing. If something's really bothering you, what is it about you that's causing you to let that thing bother you? In AA, we have this wonderful reading called Acceptance is the Answer, and it basically says whenever you're disturbed by a person, place, or thing, you need to not think about what is it about that person, that is causing you to be bothered. What is it about you that's letting that person bother you, or that thing?
Yeah. And what's the teachable moment? Because then that's where you need to go back and do some work on that, right? What is it about them that's bothering me? And what's my belief about something like that? What's my belief about someone who acts that way? What's my belief about a scenario that is that? That's the next layer that I would then ask. And then, okay, great. Well, then how are you doing that? And how are you showing up in that way in different experiences? Because usually it's a mirror, and it's a teachable moment for someone to leverage. So I really do think that's such a powerful, powerful point. So Tim, thank you so much for spending time. And again, everybody check out his book, Tripolar, The Story of a Bipolar Athlete. And you can check out his Instagram again at tripolar_Tim and ultratimdavis.com.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And it was great connecting.